Hello and welcome to the Chelsea Pants Sew Along. I'm Sarah from sewingwithsarah.com and I'm excited to be sharing the Chelsea Pants pattern with you this week. I'm thankful to our sponsors, Sly Fox Fabrics and Green Style Creations, for making this sew along possible. And so today I'm going to walk you through the first steps of the sew along. There's going to be a video each day for each of the steps, and I'm going to just be sharing some tips and tricks along the way, and there's going to be an opportunity to ask questions as we go as well. So please post your photos and questions as we go so that I can help you and we can all work together. The first thing that I'm going to do today is talk to you a little bit about fabric and supplies. One of the first things that you're going to need to consider is what fabric that you're going to use for the Chelsea pants. These were drafted for a stretch fabric, a stable knit, or a stretch woven with at least 25% two-way stretch. And I have some examples here for you. So if you could come take a look down here, got some little samples. Now I have 4 fabrics here, but there's a lot more options that you could use. This one is a stretch corduroy. And when you test the stretch is going to run from selvage to selvage. So the finished edge is here, and it would run from here to here along this edge of the fabric. And if I pull it this way, you can see that it stretches that way. But it doesn't really stretch much this way. So stretch corduroy is a great option. It doesn't need 4-way stretch, it just needs to stretch in 2 directions. To test the stretch, you would take 4 inches of fabric and pull it and make sure that it gets at least to 5 inches. This one goes beyond that, so we know that that's a good option for the pattern. Stretch denim is another popular option. This is a stretch denim sample that I have, and there are a lot of cute stretch denims available. So this would be another good option, has the right 2-way stretch. This is a pont knit. This one's fairly drapey, fairly thin too, but this would work as well. And it's got quite a bit of stretch, but none this direction. So this pont would work. And then this is a different pont fabric. Doesn't have any stretch this way, but it's got a really decent stretch from selvage to selvage. And this would work well as well. Scuba is another fabric that would be good, and there are a lot of really pretty floral scuba options. It's kind of a thicker neoprene-like fabric, so scuba would be another good one. You want to make sure when you're thinking about supplies for your pattern that you have the right needle. If you're using a stretch woven, like a stretch denim, you're going to want to make sure to use a denim needle. If you're using a knit, you want to just use a stretch needle for your sewing machine. And they're going to probably be using, if you have just a sewing machine, you can just use a sewing machine. Or if you also have a serger or cover stitch available to you, you can use those as well. But I always use my sewing machine when I construct this pattern, even though I have both a cover stitch and a serger machine. Some other supplies that you're going to want to keep in mind would be wash away wonder tape. I find this really helpful, especially for the pockets. Something to mark your pattern with. So this is a chalk that I'm using, a clover chalk. You can also use something like a friction pin. Those are also good depending on the color of your fabric. This white chalk marks really well on my dark fabrics, and I find that it does wash out well. So you want to make sure that you test on a scrap to make sure that whatever you're using to mark your fabric is going to come out just fine. Of course, scissors and a rotary cutter are useful, of course. I like to use a seam gauge when I'm measuring my pockets and how much to turn over. Pattern weights. I like to use these metal washers. And then pins and or clips, depending on your preference. And then of course a matching thread, and if you want to use a contrast thread for top stitching, like I've done on this denim pair, used a contrast kind of gold thread. You can see that. So you want to make sure that you have the right threads for your project as well. So that's a little bit about the fabric. Make sure that if you haven't already picked up the pattern that you use the discount code that's in the pinned post in the sew along, or in the sew along event. And as well, they're also offering a discount on fabric at Sly Fox. So make sure you take advantage of that as well. There's a discount code for that too. So now I'm going to take you through the steps of assembling your pattern and cutting it out and going ahead and cutting out your fabric. So I'm going to take you through those steps, and I'm excited to be sewing along with you this week. So what I want to show you right now is just how to print out your Chelsea pants pattern. You're going to want to open up the file. Make sure that you're using the PDF version if you're in the United States. You want to make sure you're using that PDF, not an A4 or an A0 file, which would be for different formatted printers. If you are international, then you would want to use the A4 file, or if you're printing it at a copy shop, then the A0 or copy shop format would be the one that you would want to use. But I'm going to print it on my home printer, so I'm using this PDF. You also want to make sure that you're opening it in Adobe Reader. That's really important so that you've got the layers and all the functions there. This is a pattern that is just overlap. You don't have to trim, so it's a trimless pattern, and it has layers. So you're just going to, when you open it up, all of these are going to be selected. This is with this little layer icon here. All of these are going to be unselected or selected, and so what you're going to want to do is unselect the sizes that you're not making. So in my case, I'm making the extra small, so that's the only one I leave the little eye by. And then you always want to make sure that the common layer is checked. And then what I usually do is just go through the pattern. You can see there's the instructions, and go all the way and figure out on what page you're going to want to start printing. For me, that's page 10. I think that should be the same across most of the sizes. So then in that case, I'm going to print page 10 through 29. So I'm just going to go to my printer icon, click print, and then you want to make sure that your scaling is set to 100%, that it's not shrinking or fitting to the page. And then I go in here, and that's where I put in page 10 to 29. I almost never print out the instructions, so that's just a way for me to save paper. And then I print it in grayscale because I'm only printing one size, so I don't need the colors to help me differentiate. And then I just go ahead and print that. So once you've done that, you're gonna go ahead and assemble your pattern, and I'm gonna show you what that looks like. I'll print it out so you can see how to assemble it. So now I've printed my pattern, and I'm just going to show you really quickly how to assemble it. You're going to have pages with a guideline on the bottom and on the right hand side. And so you're going to want to take the page that's next to it, butt it right up to the edge of that gray line. You don't want to overlap the gray line so that you can't see it. You want it to be right at the edge of the gray line. It's kind of challenging to do with one hand, but just like that. You're going to tape it there. And I always like to make sure and tape right where that join is going to be, so when I cut my pattern out, I don't have pieces that are flopping around. And then you'll go ahead and do that all the way across, and then I like to come back and then do the next row and line that up and tape that there. So that's how to print out and assemble the green style Chelsea pants, and I'll be back with more information about construction next time. Okay, so back to the green style Chelsea pants sew along. I wanted to do a quick video for you about how to shorten or lengthen this pattern. It's drafted for a height of 5 feet 7 inches, and I am considerably shorter than that. So what I need to do is I need to shorten it. There are 2 lengthen or shorten lines already built into the pattern. And when you look at taking out length or adding length from a pattern, if you're adding more than an inch, I would say, or an inch and a half, or subtracting more than an inch and a half, you want to do it in a couple of places. And this is especially important on the Chelsea pants because the exaggerated flare that makes them kind of have their signature look is right below the knee. And so if you don't get the knee right, if that doesn't hit you in the right spot, it's going to make the pants look funny, give you some funky lines. So you want to make sure to kind of distribute the length that you're adding or subtracting evenly across the pattern. So what I've gone ahead and done now, I am 5 feet 2 inches. So if I take that, that's a difference of about 5 inches from the pattern. And from my experience with green style, I know also about my body that I tend to be shorter in the legs than I am in the torso. So I need to take out 3 inches. And I'm going to do that in those 2 spaces. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and cut a line. This was the length and shorten line. I've gone ahead and cut straight across there. And then I've taken my ruler and lined it up there so that it is actually exactly 1.5 inches. And I drew a line 1.5 inches above where I cut on that length and shorten line. And so then what I do is I just take my pattern and I line it up with that original, kind of flipped over here, with that line that I drew. Now you want to keep the grain line straight. So that's where you're going to make sure that you're properly lined up there is along the grain line. So I'm going to make sure that that's straight. Oh, no, my grain line's not straight. I want to keep that straight. And then I'm just going to tape it across there. And then I'm going to do the same thing up here at this length and shorten line. I'm going to cut straight across here, over that, draw a line that's 1.5 inches because that's how much I'm shortening it there, and then tape that onto that spot, keeping that same grain line. And I may even, to make that easier, I would probably extend the grain line first so I can see exactly where that's running. Then you're going to have these spots on the edges where it's not going to be perfectly lined up, and I just blend that in. I would just kind of trim off this piece, or maybe cut a little extra up here just to blend it into the original pattern. If you are adding length, then you would just spread it apart by the amount that you're adding. Again, making sure to keep that grain line even. And then I would often, like if I were lengthening something, which I've never had to lengthen something in my life, but if I had to lengthen something, I would go ahead and tape it like extra piece of paper behind here just to kind of keep that even so that it was easier to cut my pattern out. Now I'm going to show you how I cut out my pattern pieces. So for this, I like to use my pattern weights. I use these little metal washers. I've already adjusted my pattern for my height. Something else that I've done is I've gone ahead and cut out the back pocket shape from the pants back. If you're not using the pockets, this won't be necessary, but I like to do this because it makes it a lot easier to mark it later. So I've got my pattern weights, my pattern, I've laid out my fabric, I've made sure that it's on grain, and then I've got my rotary cutter. I always use a rotary cutter when I cut. I think it makes a nice clean line. And then I've got my ruler, and this is something that I use just to make sure that my pattern is on grain. So I just kind of measure it and make sure that all the way down it's the same distance from the edge of the fabric. And you also want to confirm that the stretch is going this way because it's going to be going across your body, so you really want the stretch to be going this way. So once I've done that, I'm just going to go ahead, put my tape down as another pattern weight, and cut out the back of my pants. These are going to be cut out as 2 mirror images. Since you're using a stable fabric like a pont or a scuba or even a stretch denim, this should go pretty easily. Looks like I've got something folded under there. Okay, so that is the back. Sometimes my rotary cutter doesn't quite get all those little pieces, so I trim them off with my scissors. so there's the back. Now I'm going to refold my fabric and cut out the front. I have my front pattern piece. This is pretty narrow, and again, you're going to cut 2 mirror images. So my fabric might be wide enough to get this out of what I've got. Looks like I can do it just barely, so that's great. Now the print of this fabric makes it easy for me to tell whether it's on grain, because I just make sure that my little herringbones line up. So again, I'm going to use my ruler and just make sure that my grain line is even all the way down. Looks like this needs to come out just slightly. Got that more or less where I want it. Now I'm just going to cut out those pieces. There are no notches to mark on this pattern, so you don't need to worry about that. So now I have my 2 front pieces. So now that I have my front and my back pieces cut, the next thing I'm going to do is cut my waistband pieces. I have a front waistband, a back waistband, and then the pocket pieces if you're going to be putting on pockets. You'll notice the waistbands have a low, medium, and high rise. I find that the high rise hits me above my belly button, and the mid rise I think is going to hit me right about my belly button. So that's what I'm going to use today, is that mid rise. And it has the stretch and the grain line marked. So you want to make sure that the stretch is going to be the area of greatest stretch. That's what's going to be going around your body. So you want to make sure that's the direction that your pattern or your fabric has the most stretch in. Usually that's perpendicular to the selvage, so the selvage running this way. Usually the stretch will be running this way, but not always. Sometimes the stretch is going to run a different direction, so you just want to make sure that you're following the direction of greatest stretch. So I'm going to cut out my front waistbands as mirrored pieces. You do have the option in this pattern too of cutting your waistband lining. That's why you're cutting two front waistbands, because one of them is going to be a lining. You have the option of cutting your lining from another fabric. This is especially important if you're using something really thick, like a stretch denim that you might not want 2 layers of. You may want to consider cutting the inner waistband from a lighter weight fabric, like an athletic knit, like Supplex or something like that. This really isn't too bad, and I think that in the cooler months I'm going to be happy that I have 2 layers of it. So I'm going to go ahead and keep it both from my main fabric here. And then you're going to cut your pocket pieces. And you're going to want to cut 2 mirror images. I'm using this little scrap here, but I'm going to want to make sure that I flip my pattern piece over so that I end up with mirror images. The pattern gives you a really helpful tip when it comes to the pockets for creating a folding guide out of cardboard. So make sure to check that out in the instructions to help get you a nice crisp fold when you go to fold your pocket. So there's one pocket piece. I'm going to make sure to flip it over. Find a spot to position my second one. So now I've got my 2 mirror images for the larger pocket piece. Now I want to grab my smaller pocket piece. See if I have a good little scrap I can use for that. Looks like it'll just fit right here, so that's perfect. And again, mirror images. Set that aside, flip it over. Cut a second version. Okay, so now I've got my pockets. These little pieces seem to get lost a lot, so I like to use a clip and just clip them together so they don't disappear. So now I only have to do my back waistband. And again, I'm going to do the mid-rise. So I'm going to fold my piece down because I do like the high rise too. It just depends on the fabric I'm using and how much cake I've eaten that week. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the back waistband. Now the back waistband needs to be cut on the fold. So this little point is going to be at the fold. And that gets that nice distinctive shape that's really flattering. So I just need to position my fabric so that it's wide enough. And that looks like it's just about perfect on the fold. Again, making sure the greatest stretch is running this way, which is going to be across your body. Now this says to cut 2 on the fold because one of them, again, is going to be your inner waistband. I'm going to set that aside and cut another. Since you're cutting them on the fold, these will automatically be mirror images. that's it. You're finished with your cutting. You should have your front pants piece, your back pants piece, 2 front waistbands, 2 large pocket pieces, 2 small pocket pieces, and 2 back waistbands. Now you'll notice in the instructions at this point it has you trim, or it recommends that you trim some off of what's going to become your inner waistband. So if you've cut a contrast inner waistband, you'll do that. I like to wait until I've got the pants partially assembled to do my trimming, but you could do that now if you wanted to do it ahead of time. So now we're ready to move on to construction. So I'll see you tomorrow for constructing the pants.